Today's webinar is Building Robust Club and Collegiate Cycling Programs. Thank you for being with us today. We do have a full panel of guests featuring Brian Wolfe, Executive Director of the Connecticut Cycling Advancement Program, or CCAP, Kathy and Cody Waite of We Development, and Joey Iuliano from the University of Arizona cycling team. As always, please feel free to utilize the Q&A box for any questions. Finally, this webinar is being recorded and will be shared on our YouTube channel. Other than that, enjoy today's webinar, and I will let the team take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. Hello, everyone. We're just going to jump right into what we have on store for today, which I'm going to then kick it over to Brian with the first topic on our agenda today. So recruitment of new riders. So generally kind of go through what that looks like for your club of kind of successfully recruiting new riders for CCAP, and kind of do a little bit of background for yourself as well, Brian.
Absolutely. Yeah, my name's Brian Wolfe of the Connecticut Cycling Advancement Program. We're a 501c3 nonprofit whose mission is to get kids involved in cycling. So a big part of our club is kids, riders between the ages of 9 to 18. So that's sort of what we do. We have kids that ride for mountain bike. We do mountain bike season as well as a road and cyclocross season. So there's definitely a wide array of riders and ability level and all that sort of stuff with our club. But I think one of the most important things with like recruiting new riders is kind of knowing what your mission is or what your vision is in your club, because there's clubs of all different types, right? There's clubs that might want to just do gravel rides, or there's more elite road racing clubs, or there is just like hanging out with your friends, mountain biking kind of clubs. But having that vision and kind of making sure that that's clear helps you kind of establish where you want to go and how you want to who you want to touch base with. But like in recruiting riders, no matter what the club is, and even with ours, like it's not a one size fits all solution. Like people, you can't just like throw out a bunch of flyers on a bike shop counter and just expect your club to be booming at the next meeting, sort of thing. But that being said, like some of the great techniques that we use, like, is that print marketing. So there is flyers that we put up at bike shops. There's flyers that we put up on info boards at coffee shops, or places where, like, for us, like it's also about like getting in touch with the kids' parents and being like, okay, this is another alternative for kids to do as a sport outside of typical ball and stick sports. And so when you ask yourself, like, well, how do we get in touch with them? It's either through work-related functions, through schools, through bike shops where people are in there, like, looking to purchase bikes or helmets or equipment. And it's also other, like, usual meeting spots, like coffee shops, things like that. So for us, we'll do postcards basically outlining our season, how to get in contact with us, and the rest of the information and what comes with that. We'll do, and this one's like more of an awareness of it in general as being a sport, because I think people that aren't involved in cycling, I'm sure as everyone realizes, like, don't necessarily know all that exists. I mean, it's certainly a rabbit hole, and you could talk for hours and hours about like all the different kinds of cycling that there is. But just giving people that awareness is important. So another thing that we'll do is yard signs in areas, letting them know that we exist. Similar to how you see like youth soccer, youth lacrosse, or youth basketball signs at like intersections and stuff like that. And not that works for every club, and I don't know that the time and the money investment for the signs, putting them out there, is the absolute best, but it does work because people will be like, oh, I heard about your club through those yard signs. And so there's those kind of physical marketing items. There's also like, tents and having a team presence. So like if you are at an event of any sort, whether it's yours or one of the regional races or a grassroots race, like having your tent up there and out there is an important way to do it. You can also, I think in thinking about it from like the, collegiate side of things, like a college fair or anything like that would be another good one. There's health and safety fairs for organizations that we'll go to, and that's helpful as well to recruit coaches for us and to recruit riders for sure. Especially when it's like a health and wellness fair for a company or for like a municipality. Those are good spots. Social media is another great way to do it. So people like, as you know, nowadays, a lot of people get their information from social media, and whether that's through paid marketing, we don't necessarily do a ton of that, but more grassroots level, like sharing and marketing on Facebook pages, local groups of similar capacities, like buy and sell groups, or other areas in the night or in the region that are good for that. I think for us, honestly, it's been one of the most successful ways to do it. We've noticed it's successful is doing team info nights. So we'll do like, it's worked best for us when we've done it at like bike shops. So if we have a new area that we're trying to start a team in, and that we are creating something, if they're already partnered with a bike shop, it's even better because we can use that bike shop as the home base for that. And you have them help spread the word, you spread the word, and getting people there and kind of taking them through what you have to offer, what your club is doing, whether it's, if you know your vision, you guys like, okay, we're riding twice a week and we're going to attend these races on the weekends. Being able to like express that to people and just lay it out there, it gives them something to expect, something to get like excited for. And then they get to meet the other people that are either already on the team or like going to potentially be on the team. And it's just a great networking way to like, get people excited and involved. And honestly, like, even though it's a team info night, like adding in some fun games or something else that you can do to kind of like, not necessarily, icebreakers, because no one wants to go around and like share their name around the room, but like, you could do like a cycling bingo or something like that. We found those successful for like just engaging people. And then they kind of let their guard down and just get a little more comfortable and open to ideas, whether it's joining a new club or trying something new. Maybe they've never raced before, or they've never competed at any level, and even haven't even gone that many group rides, but you can just like kind of connect with them a little bit better and get them more comfortable and wanting to join. And then finally, word of mouth is important too. Like if you can have your club members or their family members like spread word about it. And for us, again, it's like we'll have families and coaches like spreading words to their friends about like, hey, has your kid tried cycling? Do they want to experience what it's like to do that? Are they interested in mountain biking? Oh, you've gone mountain biking a few times? That's great. Like, what would they think about doing it with some of their friends? And using word of mouth is another good way to recruit new members. But I guess like the overarching point is just like, there's not a one size fits all solution that we found, at least. And it's definitely a little bit of groundwork with it, but just knowing what your mission is and what your goal is for the team or the club is first and foremost the thing you kind of want to shape and figure out.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I think that's you touched on it in the sense that there is no, we're looking for that silver bullet, and sometimes that silver bullet is a spray approach with doing a little bit of different things to kind of come together to finding that.
Actually, one other point with that too is like, I mean, cycling in and of itself has its own barrier to entries, just for families, for kids, but also just people in general. Like someone, say you guys do a lot of road riding and you meet someone that's like, hey, I've only really mountain biked before and I want to try road riding. But if the club as a whole has like bikes they can loan out, or even like some of your club members are comfortable loaning their bikes out, just for that person to be able to try and come on a ride with you, that's another good way to kind of recruit good members for sure.
Awesome.
And it kind of creates more of a community feel too. People are like, okay, we're going to do this together. Let's do it. Perfect.
Thanks, Brian. So jumping to point number 2, finances and organization, particularly from the collegiate aspect. So we're going to have Joey, the floor is yours to kind of talk about what you've seen, kind of tips for success that you've seen from your side of things with University of Arizona.
Yeah, totally. So I think it's really important to note that, if you're not a collegiate team and you're looking to set up nonprofit status, really important to get with a tax advisor, get with a lawyer to set that up. That is not my wheelhouse, not my expertise, and it's not something that anyone should probably venture down without the guidance of some like legal professional review there. But the nice thing, if you're running a collegiate cycling team, is that you often fall underneath the kind of umbrella tax benefits of the university, which is usually a nonprofit status. So with that, you don't really have to worry about that as a collegiate team. You can just go and get your tax identification number, and then you can use that when applying for grants or sponsorships or things like that. But what I really want to hit on is like, and drive the point home with, is just like good data management goes a long way when it comes to successful fundraising and in growing that alumni database. And so something that like every team should be doing, particularly if you're a college team, is you already have to report your roster every, semester or every year to your club sports or your student affairs office. And just keeping track of that in like a shared Google Drive that future officers have access to. And then just update that as people graduate. If they graduate that year, you take them off the roster and you put them on a separate spreadsheet of everyone who graduated that year. And you just keep adding to that year over year, and eventually you're going to have a huge database of like alumni that were associated with your team. So then when you go and you start doing fundraising or calls for sponsorship, you already have that information collected on who to reach out to, who's been a part of the team. And then you can also, try to backfill that information in. So if you're just starting off, like let's say, I don't know, you just revived a team in the Midwest somewhere. So maybe like UW-Madison was like struggling for a while and they got a new leadership and they're going good now. And so they're keeping records going forward, but they need to figure out like, well, what was taking place before I was in leadership and, back into like the 80s. And typically you can find that information at like the Dean of Students office, at your club sports office, something like that. Or sometimes you might have to do a little bit more groundwork and, do some like snowball work. So figure out who was officer before you and ask them and start kind of working it backwards on who used to be in charge. And you'll start collecting the information a little bit more widely then. And once you have, that database of alumni, it becomes much easier to solicit donations. You don't need to use GoFundMe. In fact, I would strongly recommend not using a platform like that, because most universities have some type of similar program set up through their alumni foundation, like a scale funder or something like that. So it looks and operates just like GoFundMe, but the benefit is all the donations are sent to your sub account at your alumni foundation at your school, which they will take care of sending out all of the tax letters and benefits and things like that to the donors, so that the team doesn't have to manage that, because that's the real pain in the butt and where you can run into like legal trouble and tax trouble if you're sending out those letters but you're not following whatever applicable laws are. So having the foundation take care of that is much better for the student side of things. And then you have the money in your account, you can go and spend it for nationals or whatever you're trying to do. And as that continues to get traction, year over year, you'll get more donors. And it's easier to like scale that request up. So maybe you start off asking for like a $3,000 goal, and then you get, some parents and public donations and some alumni donate. And then you go back next year and you ask for 5,000, and you keep growing the number of donations, and you keep adding to that list of people that have donated before. So it's all about just record keeping and data management. And so as long as you're keeping track of who was on your team, who's graduated, where are they at, you're going to be in a much better spot. And then you can do things like alumni newsletters, sell your kits to alumni, and just, if you can keep people engaged, you don't need to bomb them with a ton of emails, but like one semester update, so in December, what happened with mountain bike season and cyclocross, and then another update in the spring is going to keep people like just engaged enough so they know what's happening with their team, and then will help them or help you when it comes to getting those donation requests. So yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents on that is keep track of who's on your team, always keep that spreadsheet up to date with who graduated, and then work with your alumni foundation on campus to do your sponsorship and your donation requests, and let them handle all the tax rigmarole. That way you don't have to worry about those kind of things.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much, Joey. Kind of switching gears a little bit, similar to finances organization, but kind of looking at kind of sustainable year-over-year success. I'm going to pivot and chat with Kathy and Cody of We Development. So kind of looking at you guys, how does your organization look at this, and kind of how do you tackle this year over year, and to solve this problem of year over year consistency?
Yeah, do you mind should I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. In terms of longevity and year over year consistency, we feel like there's probably three pieces to the puzzle. Number one, kind of knowing your club / team's vision. And then second, creating a value for your members. And then lastly, creating the personal relationship between the team and its individual riders, members. So what we kind of mean by that is, knowing your club's vision, I think first and foremost is for most clubs, except maybe the biggest, and you can't really be everything to everyone, and you really need to kind of narrow your focus down, whether that is, the easy ones are you're a collegiate team, right? Like that's a super narrow, easy one. You're a junior development program. That's like what we are. Even getting more specifically, like we're a junior development mountain bike program. And rather than trying to be junior development, road, cross, mountain bike, everything out there, I think it just spreads a team or a club potentially too thin. And, it's like the old saying of, you can be, good at a number of things, or exceptional at, a smaller, more specific thing. And that's the path we've chosen to go towards, and narrowing down that focus. And then kind of along with that is also determining how big do you plan or want your club or team to be, right? So, there's clubs as small as a few, I suppose, out there. And then there's clubs with several hundred. When we started our program, we started with 7 riders, and it was very much a local club in the Denver area. And then the second year we grew, we added a few more and brought on the idea. Well, we had a young rider come to us from out of state, the neighboring state in Wyoming, and said, "Hey, what are you guys doing here? Like look like you got a good thing going." And so we added our first out of stater, rider, and then since then we really exploded and went kind of too big in our opinion. We went up to like 50 riders, I think, in our third year, and we were like, this is like spreading us a little bit too thin. We feel like the quality of what we're providing in terms of the coaching and the race support and all that just got a little too
It was overwhelming.
spread out. Yeah. And so then we kind of backpedaled the fourth year down to 30 riders. And since then, we've kind of identified 30 riders is the perfect amount for our organization. It's something we can manage. We can provide a very good service, plenty of attention to all of the individual riders, and have just kind of settled on that. That's our number. So I think that's a big piece, is figuring out, every club will be a little bit different. Some people would be perfect, with 12 or 15. And maybe if you have more kind of staff members or more people in the leadership roles, maybe you can handle 50 or 60 or 100 or whatever that may be. But I think just knowing what that's going to be, rather than just sort of like going at it willy-nilly, so to speak, is a big part of it. And then also in terms of the club's vision is, really figuring out, this is kind of reverts back to the first topic, but really figuring out what your sort of application selection process is potentially for your club or your team. Some clubs, I'm thinking more maybe on the local level, are very much inviting to everyone, and more of like maybe the beginner to intermediate level of rider experience, kind of open to everyone, pay the fee and be a part of the team. Then as a team kind of grows and expands to, greater regions of the country and nationally and so forth, once you know what your club size is, you may end up finding you're getting more interest than what you can sort of accommodate. And you have to really come up with that sort of application and selection process. And that's been something that that Kathy and I have been still fine tuning every year of how to do that. We started with a simple one sheet application, and more recently this last year, we added, a much more lengthy application to sort of weed out some of the people that maybe just like, I'm just going to send in my application and try to, see what happens. Right. And then it's like, oh, now we have like 100 applications to go through. And that was a lot for us to kind of deal with. Where then this last year, we made it a lot more complicated, and you had to get letters of recommendation and things like that. And we could then we only got like 30 applications, and it was like, okay, now we've weeded out, some riders that would potentially be wasting our time, kind of going through those, and then also figuring out our, once we've gone through applications, how to start those initial communications, in terms
I'll say
of,
something.
yeah, go ahead on
Yeah,
that.
so I was really pleased with how it kind of worked out this year. In fact, Cody was a little panicky because we were getting less applications because the standard was much higher. But from my perspective, and I think his now, it was better in the long run. But the way we do it, and again, this is going to be different from maybe a local team, but we would get the application, the letters of recommendation. I also included like a lifestyle questionnaire because I was really trying to weed out spoiled brats, to be frank. And I wanted to know, like, what chores do they do around the house? How are they interacting in their community? And what interests do they have outside of cycling? I really wanted to see who they are as a person, because that's the most important thing to Cody and me, is, are they a good person? We don't really go around cherry picking like the best riders, particularly. We want people who are interested in riding their bike, racing their bike, learning about training, and being really good people. So then once that happens, once I get those pieces of information, then we would decide like which candidates we would maybe contact. And that I would always start with a text message or an email, sometimes both. Are you able to have a quick chat with me on the phone? And honestly, like kids nowadays, teenagers, they're not always comfortable talking on the phone because that's not their world. But that is a really important part of our coaching program. Like we spend a lot of time talking to each rider on the phone. And if they can't have a conversation with us on the phone, then it's not going to be a great fit for our program. So we would start with a 5 to 10 minute phone call, actually just with the rider and me. And if that went well, if it seemed like it was going to be a good fit, then we would schedule a Zoom call with the rider, a parent or both parents, and the two of us. And that was a really great opportunity for 30 to 60 minutes to talk to the family about who we are, what's our program like. They could ask us every question they wanted to, and then we would get an idea of who they are too, because we're going to spend a lot of time with them as like a group at the National Race Series, and we want the families to be people we want to have around as well.
Right.
So that's like that topic. We're maybe talking too much, but
a lot of detail, but yeah. And then creating value for your members. I think that really sets you up for that longevity. And then, if you have riders that join your program and you provide them with plenty of value, they're going to be more likely to want to continue with your program in the future. And then they're going to be telling their friends or, other people about, your program. So it's a great way for the marketing aspect as well. But, value for the members can, look a lot of different ways. But some of the ones we've bulleted down here was, being very organized. I think that's a key component to it, and the communication pathways that you choose to use with your program. So, we use communications like Slack for, like a texting board, message board sort of system.
About that. I know there's a lot of good programs out there for teams and clubs. We just found Slack originally like 3 or 4 years ago, and I didn't want to switch because we have like all of our channels set up. And how we do it is we have a Slack workspace that is just for our team, the 30 members of our team. And then we have a Slack workspace for our parents only, to keep it separate because we really don't want helicopter parents. But we also know that's incredibly important to keep parents informed. And that way that kind of keeps them from being helicopter-y. And we have a lot of information that we share in each workspace that I think is really important for the parents. Because if I were a parent giving my kid to somebody for a program, I'd want to know what was going on. Alongside of that, we do a once a month parent Zoom call for about an hour. And we talk about things like equipment orders, team camp, the races that are coming up. Sometimes we even talk about nutrition and health and psychology of racing just to help the parents support their rider. And I think that's been a huge bonus for making the program have its legacy, because the parents feel like it is like a team effort. We're all in this together. And then it just, helps mitigate problems. If they don't understand what's going on, then they may have frustrations, but they understand what's going on. It's going to kind of all run more smoothly.
Right. So those meetings are really key to create that value, and those will look different for different kinds of clubs. I mean, we're more of a national level club. Our members are spread all over the country, and maybe a more local based club might be able to do in-person meetings, and things like that as well. And then along similar lines, having events, whether they're, the local races that you're doing, or you're traveling regionally or nationally. And then also things like training camps or group rides, all those sorts of things are really valuable for members. So really having that. And then also things like creating, discount programs and sponsorships and things where like your members get the goodies, so to speak, on stuff that can provide a lot of value. If you have a agreement with a local bike shop that's can give you 20% off of, new bikes for the year. Like that saves a rider potentially thousands of dollars. And that's a clear value. And then the last thing that I think is really valuable for a lot of clubs would be having some sort of formal training program. And whether that's, more of a kind of a one size fits most sort of thing, and everyone sort of adjusts individually, or maybe you have a coach on staff, or maybe your club is actually run by a coach. I think there's a lot of value for beginning cyclists as well as experienced cyclists to have that. But if members of your organization are at least on a similar training structure, it's a lot easier than to coordinate training camps and group rides and other events in there too. So I think that having a coach, not that it's necessarily required that everyone in this club has to use this coach or coaches, but at least having that available and maybe presenting at the start of the season. Here's, these months are sort of established as our base season, where you can expect this sort of training options. This is more of our race season. You can expect this sort of training options. Provides a lot of value to riders as well. And then our last piece was that creating the personal relationship between the team and the individual or the member, the rider. And that's what's going to also really create longevity and having riders want to return to your program
or tell other people to
and
apply.
tell other people. And that gets, potentially more difficult. There's a lot of like personality things involved there, but however you get to figure out what works for the management of the club and then reaching out to their riders. But if you can create that, healthy, positive personal relationship, people are going to want to stick around. I mean, just to put it frankly, and that's what creates the longevity there. So Kathy's kind of our go-to for that. I know all the young riders in our program just love the attention that they get, from both of us, but I think Kathy in particular, especially at the races. I mean, if you've ever been to a mountain bike race and Kathy's there,
put your earplugs in.
She's there because she's cheering, full effort for all the riders, and that sort of personal relationship goes a long ways, and I think all of the riders really appreciate that. So
thank you so much. I think there's definitely, I pulled out some things that even from my own notes for the team that I support, I think that's something that I can pull out and apply. So thank you for sharing those.
Sure.
Briefly, Joey, kind of want to go back to you as well to kind of for the club aspect, because it definitely feels like, I mean, I raced briefly in college too, and it was just that yo-yo aspect in the Midwest Conference of like, all right, we have interest, and then we think we can carry it over into the next year, and then it relies so much on that student, and then it drops and it disappears for a year, and then it comes back and then it drops. So kind of what are, just briefly in a couple of minutes, like how would you kind of solve for this in the collegiate space, knowing that you're kind of working with collegiate athletes?
So that's kind of the $1 million question, right? I mean, that's something that every student-run organization faces, is that kind of cyclical nature. If you get some really good involved student leaders, they graduate. And if there's not a really good transfer of knowledge, then it kind of goes back down, right? It just keeps kind of going up and down like this. And it's not just collegiate cycling, that's club triathlon, that's chess club, math club, it doesn't matter. It's true for everyone. So the really only way you solve that is having like a really involved either external coach that is like kind of the person there keeping the train on the tracks, or like a really involved faculty advisor, which is me in this case, who is the one who's really ensuring that it's student run, right? So it's our club officers who are still making the decisions about like, yeah, this is what we want to go to for events, and this is how we're going to support riders and stuff. But you know, it's ultimately comes back to me to ensure that like those things are achieved. So it's me going back to the officers and saying, hey, did you follow up with this sponsor? Did you follow up with Alumni Foundation to get our fundraiser going? Did you start looking at the logistics for this race weekend, and do you need any help planning this out? And so I still, you know, I let them try to get as much experience as possible from that leadership perspective of planning out weekends and things like that. And then I'm there to ensure that the goals are met year over year, right? And that's not the case for every school when it comes to like their faculty advisor. Some are very hands off and they're not going to be that involved. And so maybe that's where you need to have that, you know, external coach who's going to be someone who probably used to race collegiate. That's a good opportunity, I think, you know, for alumni to get involved, regardless of if they are from that school or not, to kind of give back and keep that, like I said, keep the wheels on the right track. It is, you know, completely different than what Cody and Kathy are talking about, you know, for most of your club programs for collegiate. You know, you need to be accepting and getting everyone in the door, like, you know, as many people as you possibly can, right? So from the folks that just got a bike like the other day, maybe they're rolling around on like a Huffy bike, it doesn't matter. Like, we want every person who has any interest in the U of A cycling team to come to one of our meetings, to come get dinner with us, to join us on a coffee ride. And so we structure everything. And this is what I said in one of the responses to a question is, you know, we structure our stuff around having like some very easy to attend rides that everyone can participate on. It doesn't matter what bike. It's 3 miles to the coffee place from campus, right? Everyone can do that. And then we do team dinners, movie nights, just really fun social things that get folks who like don't see themselves as racers to want to associate with us. And then when they start, you know, maybe they come on a couple of the other rides, maybe they buy like a, you know, more gently used road bike, or they borrow one, and then they get really excited, and then they try their first race, and then they're hooked, right? And that's what we want to see. So like, yeah, am I excited when I get the NICA standout rider who has been racing for 4 years and is already a Cat 1 or a UCI mountain biker? Yeah, you bet. I'm super stoked. But I'm also really excited when I get, you know, the international rider from India who has only been riding for like 2 days. And now he's been riding for like 5 months with us, and he can do like a team time trial, and he has really good handling skills, and he's super excited. In some ways, that's almost more exciting to me to watch them develop, you know, through the ranks than it is to get someone who's like already super fast. And so like, yeah, we're definitely balancing, at least here, we're trying to balance, like, we got the fast people, how do we keep them engaged and keep them, you know, ready to race? And then how do we get the new people to kind of start moving up? And honestly, for like, you know, club leadership stuff, because I saw there's a question about, you know, millennials and Gen Z like not volunteering. It's not the fast people that are your best club officers. In fact, I would almost argue that your Cat 1s and 2s are often not your best club leaders. That's not true for everyone. I'll preface that. But usually you want your like beginner, like your dude who just or gal who just loves bikes. They race very casually, but they can just speak to the new people. That's going to be the one that can really get people in the door and excited about racing. And, you know, draw on your experienced riders to help with like skills clinics, race tactics and stuff like that, right? So you can keep them engaged. And it really comes back to, if you want to get those kids volunteered and good leadership and have that knowledge of transfer knowledge happening year over year, it's so that they see the value in what they're doing, right? So like if they come and volunteer at the home race weekend, right, and they're shoveling sand out of corners and leaf blowing gravel and all that stuff and moving porta-johns and what have you, and they see what comes from that hard labor of putting on the event, they're much more likely to like, they own it because they did it, right? And they want to see it continue because they saw how cool it was to have 400 people or whatever come do the event. And they're like, I did that, right? I made that happen. And like, how can I make it happen next year? And so that's really, you have to give them ownership of things to get them really excited about what's happening.
Love it. Thank you. Okay, Brian, back over to you. So looking at, I know Joey kind of touched on it briefly in just his last answer, but like, how do you prep first time racers? Like how does CCAP look at that experience? I really truly think it is like a journey almost to get them from when you recruit them in one of your avenues coming to like a first time, like an info meeting at a bike shop, and then get them to toe the first line of their first event. Like, what does that look like with CCAP?
For sure. I mean, I think like the first starting step for us is like identifying who those people are, whether it's asking them when they're signing up or when we meet them, just being like, hey, have you ever raced before? Have you tried? Have you done anything? Have you ever done? If they say no, you'd be like, hey, have you ever done like have you ever done a 5K? Have you ever done a cross country meet? Have you done track? Like, okay, no. Well, like just kind of getting that understanding for where they're at and where they're starting at is like first and foremost one of the more important parts. And like if they haven't done anything but they've been like cycling for a bit and they say they've been riding, for example, is like if a kid comes in and they're like, yeah, well, we ride like, once a year on our family vacation and we're out there, like we go up to Maine to go ride with our family at the campground, and like that's about it. You're like, okay, great. Like you can kind of just ask them some more questions about that and see, what their interest is in it. And then like, I mean, racing in and of itself is a different experience for everybody, right? But like generally shared, I feel like most people's first race experience is a challenge for sure. It's definitely like an exponential learning curve in a lot of ways. I mean, I can remember like the first criterium that I ever jumped in and just getting like shelled out of the back and being like, this is a lot harder than I thought. And honestly, like we found it pretty successful when we're like, look, like racing's going to be hard and it's going to be kind of tough, but you're going to learn a bunch throughout it, and you're going to be able to push yourself to become a better rider and like understand what it means to like go race for half an hour or go race for an hour. And then your technical ability is going to grow and you're going to get a bunch out of this. But like, I guess where I'm going with that is like mental preparation is a big part of it as well. And kind of like setting expectations in a realistic yet encouraging way. Like you don't want to be like, you're going to have a terrible time. You're going to get dropped. It's going to be rough. But you need to express like a little bit of kind of the trials and tribulations of it, but trying to work with them to like set a goal for them. So like, if you know that they've never raced before, you're not as a coach or as a leader in the club, you're not going to be like, okay, great. Your goal is to win. Like, it's like, okay, now like your goal is to stay with the back of the group for 2 laps or 1 lap or whatever that is. And like setting those expectations for that person and then checking in with them after is super important for sure. And that's just from like a mental side of things. Like you want to be encouraging them. Actually, Cody mentioned that Kathy does that at the races. No matter what the level is, like that's still important, right? Like people want to be encouraged. They want to be like, they want to hear that they're seen regardless of what step in that journey that they're at. But like checking into them, even if they come off the race course after the first race and they're a little bit bummed out, like you just talk to them and just be like, look, well, you still stayed with them for the first 2 laps. So you achieved your goal. That's great. So like, let's work towards the next goal. And keeping it that way from a mental side of things is super important. And then just touching on like, kind of all the things that can be out of their control during a race as it applies to them. Because there's a lot that goes on in racing that is out of your control and you can only manage so many variables. So just kind of like working through that, obviously not in an overwhelming way, but just in like breaking it down. For us, it's breaking it down to kids, but like I would also say that like we're also a bunch of big kids, so like you could break this down for adults in a very similar way. So like, yeah, you just to kind of explain all the things that went well to set themselves up for their best result that they could have had during that race. That doesn't necessarily mean the best result in the whole race out of the actual like finishing places, but their best result, they've achieved that for where they're at, then it's huge success. And then like another part of it is like choosing the right event for them to race and start racing with, right? Like you don't want to necessarily take someone who's just coming into the sport and be like, hey, we're taking a trip down to nationals next week. Do you want to come with us and like give it a shot? Like that's kind of just, it's going to be super overwhelming for them. And they might do well, and they might be the kind of person that's super resilient and can take that well, but it's just not necessarily the recipe for success. And I think for us, like a big part of that is choosing like training races or some of the grassroots level races. Ourselves, we put on like some short track mountain bike races, which are like short track in and of itself is great spectator environment. It's also a little bit more low key. They could be weeknights where we have school clubs and some of our regional riders as well joining and coming out, but it's a little bit more low key. It's a little bit more fun. There's kind of less pressure. I don't know if it's the whole after school thing or a weeknight thing or whatever. It's just a little less daunting for them. Same with our like we do a crit series in the summer that's similar, and we have like a junior practice before that, and I'll get into some of the on the bike stuff that we do with kids because that's also super important part. But I think that's something to be said is like choosing the right event for them for sure. I would totally recommend a more grassroots level event, or if they're even another big thing to mention, if they're like brand new to cycling, just in general, it's because again, that's a spectrum too. Like if they're brand new to cycling, and Joey was talking about having an international student come, that's like, I've ridden 2 days. Like you're not necessarily going to throw them into a race, even a training race right off the bat. You want to like get them into, for us, we'd want to get the kid into like, we'll get them into some group rides, like whether it's a shop ride or something like that. That's like a no drop style ride, or just riding with the team during practice and sort of practicing some of that pace line just to get comfortable around other riders. Cause that's another big part of racing, of course. I mean, you're racing against riders, so you're around them. But then you could take them after that group ride experience and then move them into a training race and then into like some more competition, depending on how that's going. So that's those have been super successful for us, and it's different for every person. Some kids like they'll come off the side of the race course and be like, that was awesome, even though they got lapped like after the second or third lap, just because they had so much fun and like all the buzz that happens during a race and all that fun. And it didn't matter how they finished, but they just had a ton of fun. And then there's other kids who might have wanted to see a better result with them, and so you kind of want to see in those moments how the kid is, or how that person's ticking, and just be like, okay, well, you did really well with this, and like that was awesome for you, so congratulations, like we'll keep working at the other stuff. And then so like that covers mental preparation and then choosing the right event. But then another thing, like there's a ton of on the bike work that can happen for sure, and that's just with like the whole point in that is just to get someone comfortable in how they work on a bike. I mean, there's plenty of videos and lessons and stuff like that, but like we go back to, for a lot of things, like just with people's individual comfort, body bike separation, the idea that like the bike is, while it is, you're on the bike, it's like, I like to use the analogy of like, you have 2 arms, right? Like you can move one without the other one moving as well. And so like you are connected to the bike, but you can kind of move them independently. And like just getting that idea into the kids' heads seems to be helpful with that. And then in terms of like specific drills, we've used starting drills are super important. I mean, every bike race starts, whether it's road, mountain, cyclocross, they all start with having to clip in. Obviously cross and mountain are a little bit more like from the gun, sort of clip in and go. Road can sometimes be like that as well, but just practicing that so it becomes second nature to them is a great way to do it. And there's fun games around it that you can do it in a group setting where you set up some water bottles and you can give away little prizes like candy or like whatever it is. Like if you have extra swag or anything like that, something fun to kind of motivate the kids and like see if once they start to get proficient with just doing it, you can time them and see who gets the fastest time. You can do all that sort of stuff just to keep it interesting and engaging. And again, just like being encouraging the whole time is a great way to do it. So then they get comfortable with that aspect. And there's you can ask just about any racer and whether they've been racing for 2 months or they've been racing for 15 years. Like there's always going to be nerves at the start of a race. So anything you can do to kind of like quiet that comfort a little bit, quiet that noise a little bit and create some comfort for them by just practicing this stuff is super important. Another thing is bumping drills. We'll do those in like an open field. And so those are another one of my favorite. to do. Like usually doing it in an open field, you want to start in grass, right? So like the risk of injury is low. And so you can do bumping drills and have them bump into each other and just riding around 2x2, purposely trying to bump into each other. Specifically useful for crits, but it's honestly useful for really any kind of racing. It happens in mountain bike racing at the start all the time. It happens in cyclocross racing at the start all the time. It happens all the way around the course in a cross race. So it's a super useful thing to be able to like lean into someone and be more comfortable with that contact, so you don't freak out in the middle of a start or just going through a corner or whatever it is. Paceline practice is another one for road specific sort of things. It again can be useful in the other disciplines as well. But just getting comfortable riding close to people, not necessarily touching people, but like being aware of where your bike is in relation to other people's bikes. And then of course for like, there's discipline specific stuff. But with cyclocross, we'll do dismounts and remounts and just drive those home, starting from like a really slow level. And that's one thing that like, even if it's not for just cross practice, like we'll do it with our road riders, and we'll do it with mountain bike too, because there's times where you, within any discipline, hopefully less in road than the others, that you have to get back on your bike and get off your bike. And that's another thing that can just make them a little bit more comfortable in these first time racing experiences. So it's all a learning process and a spectrum, but just like exposing them to the individual aspects that come into play during racing, that can go such a long way with just making them a little bit more comfortable so they're not overthinking it.
Awesome. Very, very good. And speaking of time, I do want to give a thank you to Joey for hopping on before he had to head to class. So Joey, you're free to go if you need to give yourself some time to prep for lecture. But thank you again for your time. And if there's any questions that you have for Joey at the end or anything like that, we can tag team that and we'll get those to Joey after and share that out. So
yeah, totally. No, I really appreciate the opportunity to come and chat for a little bit. And yeah, Parker and Matt have my email, and I'm more than happy to talk with folks about collegiate cycling endlessly when it comes to team management and ideas and stuff. So please don't be shy about reaching out with ideas on, how to get your team going or revamp it or whatever. I was trying to answer some of the questions in the Q&A as quickly as I could, but I'm always happy to chat about collegiate cycling because it's the whole reason why I did my PhD and why I'm doing what I'm doing now. So it's really important for me to give back so that people have that similar experience. But anyway, I'll let you guys enjoy the rest of your seminar. So thanks for letting me join for a bit, and I hope to talk with all you guys soon.
Sure. Awesome. Cool. And then wrapping it up with our last topic for today, but sponsorship, which I know like can ebbs and flows for a lot of clubs and all aspects of even just the more professional ones out there to the ones that are just getting started. So kind of that whole acquiring and retention and servicing of sponsors, looking to kind of Cody and Kathy to get us started with like what have been your experiences with this and kind of what have you learned and things that you think are good to kind of carry forward.
Sure. Yeah, we've been doing this for a long time. I mean, myself as a racer years and years ago, I mean, I remember being a teenager and writing up my first sponsorship proposals, and sending it off by actual mail, putting a stamp on it, mailing out to companies and trying to, get some sort of sponsorship when you're 18 or whatever. And, rarely does it work out. But so I've learned a lot over the years and happy to share. So the way I first look at it is kind of defining what the different levels of, what's a sponsor versus a partner versus an affiliate. So we look at, in our program, a sponsor is kind of the big donor, so to speak. So that could be the big cash donor. That could be the big equipment supplier or donor. So it's like kind of the heavy investment is what we consider the sponsors, comparing that to a partner. So a partner is more of the common thing. So that's where you partner with Scratch Labs, for example. And what do they do for your club? They give you a 30% discount or whatever the case may be. Or you partner with your local bike shop. And what do? They give you, X discount on bikes and this discount on soft goods and that sort of thing. So it's more of that like discount based partnership as opposed to considering that a like sponsorship. And then the third one has become more popular recently in the social media world, which is becoming an affiliate. And so an individual can be an affiliate, but also can be a club or a program. And an affiliate, the way that generally works is you have some sort of referral code set up with the company that you're distributing perhaps amongst your membership base. That's always the first place to start. And then trying to get it out there to the general public via maybe your social media or however you decide to do that. And then as the sales are made to that company that you're working with, that your club can potentially get some, cash commission or maybe a product-based commission out of it. So I first look at it in that regard. You have sponsors, you have partners, you have sponsors, which are the cash and maybe the big pricey ticket equipment given to your program. Then you have the partner, which is like the nice discounts given to your riders and or your program. And then you have that affiliate agreement that you are kind of advertising for that company and maybe getting some product or cash back in return for your effort. Then the next real big phase is determining, identifying what your club is, what your structure is in terms of what kind of budget does your program need to kind of run and be successful and meet the goals? And then also, what is your geographical reach? Because those two things will really determine who you're going to sort of quote go after in terms of sponsorship. And are you actually maybe not looking for loads of cash? Maybe it's a local program and really what you need is a lot of equipment to distribute to your riders or the discount so they can order product, what they need. Maybe that's more of importance. Or maybe you're a team that travels to a lot of events and that's where the cash really comes in. You need to, buy plane tickets or gas money or, pit fees, like tent space at the big races and things like that. You need the cash for that. So determining, are you, more of a local regional program that'll sort of steer your sponsorship efforts, or are you more of a national or international program and that's going to steer you maybe a little bit different direction and what you kind of have your sights set on and how you're going to kind of organize your pitch deck and your ask as you reach out to sponsors and partners and affiliates. Then after that, it's really about taking it another step further and determining what does your program need versus want. And then also kind of tempering your expectations potentially, because it's very commonplace we see this a lot with our young riders as they're kind of making their way up through becoming, faster racers. All of a sudden, they win their state, championship and suddenly they think that, a bike company is going to want to, ship them a couple of bikes for free and, do all this stuff. That doesn't really happen in the real world. So tempering expectations even amongst your riders within your program and then also possibly even your program itself, because even our program is a fairly successful national level program and we get to international races, but it's still you kind of have to work hard to secure those sponsorships. And when you do finally get them, you want to hang on to them. And we'll talk about how to do that here momentarily. But really kind of then circling back, determining, needs versus wants. So in my opinion, at least with our group, the needs really come down to one, because we do travel and we go to a lot of events, we are in need of cash. So we've identified we need X number of dollars every season so we can get to these, half dozen events, drive there, pay a mechanic, set up the tent space, have hotel rooms or rental houses, possibly pay for some entry fees, things like that. So we've determined, what that need is in terms of the cash front. And then we also determine what do we need to support these 30 riders in our program in terms of a equipment front. Well, we're not at the level where we can just hand out bikes to all 30 riders, but we've worked with our bike partner, Scott Bikes, to secure sponsorship with a really significant discount that we can offer to each one of our riders. And that sets them up with their equipment for the season. And then we, on the team side, have agreements with component sponsors like SRAM and wheel sponsors and things like that. So we can then fill some storage containers in our van with, all the spare parts and things that we're going to need when we go to these events. So we can keep the riders rolling, chains and brake pads and tires and all those sorts of things. Then there's like the wants. Well, your riders in your club may want that really cool Theragun or whatever, because those are like really cool to have, but is that actually like that valuable to your program in terms of like keeping the momentum and success of your program going? Probably not. Those wants are sort of the last things maybe that you go after in terms of sponsorship, but it's nice to have those wants because a lot of the riders do want those wants, right? They get excited when they get kind of whatever the hot, thing is, the latest thing for recovery or whatever that's maybe not going to be as critical to get them to the start line of an event, but, maybe just to make their season as a whole a little bit more enjoyable. So identifying those sorts of things. The big thing is, I think for local regional clubs and programs, partnering with a bike shop is really key. I think most do that already. But if you can find that bike shop that's willing to work with you, and then it sort of opens the door much wider to accessing more of the brands and products. And a lot of bike shops, we've had experience over the years when we were a smaller level program, can open those doors, and you have more options and opportunities for your riders to obtain equipment that they need or want at a discounted price. And that goes back to an earlier discussion we had, right, about creating value for your riders as well. Now, as your program becomes maybe a bigger, more national level program like ours, for example, with riders all over the country, we had to move away from having a bike shop because it didn't really make sense, where we had a bike shop partner where we lived, but only a couple of riders maybe lived where we lived, and the majority of the riders were spread all over. And so it wasn't really useful to have a bike shop. And so then we had to figure out how to expand more nationally and work more directly with the brands, like the US organization of the brands, as opposed to the distributors or the retailers. And figuring out, how to do that took some time. And, it's really boils down to like getting into who and making connections and, having hopefully the management in your club and or your program, has been in the sport for a number of years. And, the longer you're in the sport, you make those connections, and it gets, a little bit easier at least to have that happen. And then as your club, increases its longevity and perhaps success rate, if you're more of a racing program, that gets more attention as well, and a little bit easier to at least get your pitch deck in front of the brands for those sponsorships and things. The other big question too then is to nonprofit or not to nonprofit. And Joey touched on this earlier. This was something when we first started our development program, we were not a nonprofit, frankly, because we just didn't really know how to do it, and we were just getting started. So we were just, fighting for what we could. We were local. So local organizations, you want to go after kind of local companies, local businesses, so-and-so's, construction company, or, Dr. So-and-so's dental office, things like that. Those kind of companies might potentially throw some cash towards your program. Again, it's oftentimes, who do you know? Like maybe it's a parent of a kid in your junior development program, or maybe it's a member of your program that is the dentist and wants to support the program, those sorts of things. And then as you become a bigger program and or needing and wanting more cash, you start having more asks. We have definitely found having that 501 C3 nonprofit status opens the door much, much wider. In year 2 of our program, we started asking for more for more money. And the companies would come back and say, well, are you nonprofit? If you're nonprofit, it's like a no-brainer. They can just, it's not quite this easy, but they just write you a check and send it to the nonprofit. But if you say, no, we're not, then sometimes it shuts the door. And sometimes, there's just more hoops and hurdles and it takes longer to get acquired. So that's something I would definitely encourage programs as you're growing. And when you get to a point where you need, more and more cash and or product, looking at the nonprofit structure. And there's 2 different ways to do that. We won't go into this too deeply, but there's the classic way that's quite lengthy to get the status, and there's a lot of complications, but there's also what's called the 501(EZ) nonprofit status, which is actually rather easy to get. The limitation is just, $50,000 of incoming donations or funds is your limit. If you go over that, then you're not considered the easy structure, and you have to do more of the traditional 501(c)(3). But if you're in that easy structure under $50,000 of donations, it's not terribly difficult. You set up you have to have a board of 3 people, and fill out a form, and you just send in your annual report, and it's fairly straightforward, honestly. But again, like Joey said, I would say talk to your accountant and tax people that you have at your disposal to make sure that's the right way to go. But we found that was a big help for us to be able to pull that off. And then in terms of gaining those sponsorships, or how do you go about getting that, creating what's called a pitch deck is really important. So a pitch deck is basically the term for putting together what you used to stuff in an envelope and mail off. Now you create a PDF and you email it off, but it's 3 to maybe 10 pages of information explaining what your program is. A lot of graphics, yeah, a lot of images are helpful, but explaining what your program is, what your mission statement is, what you're trying to achieve, creating, maybe stating what sort of problem or hurdle exists that your program is going to overcome. So our pitch deck was basically, in a nutshell, junior cycling, mountain bike cycling, there's the high school programs, but then what's after the high school programs? Well, there's the collegiate programs, but those are just a small time of the season. But it's like you take a high school racer that wants to start racing nationally at UCI races and so forth. There's not, in our country, much of a solidified framework of how to do that. So people and the kids and the parents are scrambling to kind of figure out, well, how do I get my kid to keep climbing this ladder? Well, our answer to that was to create our program, where kids can be a part of it, and we can, coach them and guide them through the process of becoming a better bike racer, but also how to navigate, getting to those races, understanding the point systems and all those sorts of things. So our pitch deck was really around, here's the problem. We've got, a lot of mountain biking talent that sort of gets lost at the end of the high school seasons, and how do we keep this going so we can get more Americans to international races and higher on the Olympic podiums and things like that. And we development is a possible solution to that problem. And then we would explain who we are. Cody and Kathy, we're the coaches, we're the professional athletes, former professional athletes. We've been in this sport for the majority of our lives, and here's why you should trust us to be guiding your kid and representing your company, and why you should be a partner or a sponsor of our program. And then you also want to outline, and be very clearly, very specific with what are you asking that sponsor or that partner for. You'll see that a lot where people will send out something kind of generic that's like, sponsor our team or partner with our team, and there's no real ask. So if you're going to hit up, say, Scratch Labs, for example, for nutrition stuff, be very specific to what you're asking. Because if you just say like, will you Scratch, sponsor our program? Well, there's a big wide range of what that means, you know, and if you're asking for cases and cases and cases of product, maybe that won't really appeal to them, or they might not be able to support that. If you're asking for a 20% discount, that's super easy for a company like that, and they'll more than likely do that. Or maybe it's a mixture, you know, that's more common. Like, well, we could use, you know, a couple of cases of product as we go to, you know, this race event here and maybe nationals here. And then on top of that, maybe the 20% or 30%, whatever it is, discount that you're asking for. So being really specific about what it is you're asking your sponsor, your potential sponsor partner for, and then finishing that up with, in turn, what are you, the club, going to give back in return, right? So it's a business negotiation and agreement that you're asking for their resources, and you have to give something back for that, and explain exactly what you're going to do. In the old days, it was always like, well, we'll put your logo on our jersey, and, you know, we'll try to get on the podium and stuff. Well, that was like, okay. But in today's world, what I've found is, you know, having the logo on the jersey is less and less of a concern for sponsors and partners. And really what they're looking for are all the like social media efforts, everything from, you know, the Instagram posts or the YouTube videos, you know, those are way more valuable to a company than, you know, just putting their logo on the pocket of your jersey where almost no one really sees it. So, you know, but being very clear about what that is, and maybe explaining too, like, okay, our reach as a club is whatever it is. You know, we go to these races in the state of, you know, North Carolina. Okay, we can kind of roughly calculate what that reach might be, and then compare that to a reach of like, okay, we're going to be traveling in the entire western half of the country and doing all of these races. Well, bigger reach, you know, maybe calculate out what that's going to be, and then that will appeal to different sponsors potentially as well. So the more specific you can be with all that stuff, I think the more the potential sponsors and partners will see the value, and the more they'll kind of continue reading basically and like dig into it, and then share that with someone else in their board and say like, this looks really good to me, what do you guys think, kind of thing. And then the last piece is like upholding, once you've got the sponsors, you know, upholding your end of the bargain, in terms of doing the social media efforts, you know, getting their logo on whatever it was you said you were going to get their logo on. If it's the clothing, if it's the team vehicle, if it's the team tent, et cetera, making sure that does happen, and upholding that end of the bargain. If you said, okay, we're going to do, you know, 2 Instagram posts a month for the 8 months of the season, make sure you do in fact do that. I mean, it's very obvious, but
It's hard to keep up with.
it's hard to keep up with it. Yeah. And along those lines, just some little tips and things I would throw in just to finish it up here is, don't resist the temptation to acquire too many sponsors or partners, because the longer your list becomes, while that kind of like looks cool on your hashtags or maybe on your vehicle, it also creates a lot more work for whoever it is in your program that has to do all those social media posts and, you know, maybe event reports that they're emailing out and those sorts of things. So the more brands you have, it kind of, in my opinion, dilutes the value of each individual brand that you end up aligning with. So what I've sort of settled in on is we usually like to have about 5 brands that we'll sponsor partner with, and that seems to be a good mixture of fulfilling all the things that we need and want, but then also we can stay on top of and hopefully do a good job of representing those brands and maintaining that relationship for several years. And that's really the last thing I'll throw out there too is, you know, resist the temptation of like changing brands year to year. You know, sometimes that's out of your control. A company might come to you and say like, this has been great, we love working with you, but we're redirecting our marketing resources somewhere else. That's fine. But, you know, stick with whatever, if you get an agreement with, you know, Zip Wheels, for example, and, you know, stick with Zip Wheels for as long as you can, even if, you know, those Envy wheels over there look pretty sweet coming out next year. Like, you're way better off having the same brand for years and years and years, in my opinion, rather than, having a different brand of bike or clothing or whatever, every year or every other year, and I think too, brands will recognize that also, and say like, oh, we develop, and they've been riding Scott bikes for 7 years since the beginning. Like they're loyal to that brand. Well, if we can get in there as whatever company they are, then, they'll potentially be more loyal to us. Where if they're like, they change brands every year, that's more work for the management, but it just doesn't, it's not as professional, I suppose, is the way I would look at it. But so, yeah, I hope that was helpful.
Definitely. Yes, I think, yes, you touched on a little bit of everything. So,
okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Fantastic. I do appreciate Brian, Cody, and Kathy, and Joey, who dropped off earlier to go attend lecture. So back over to you, Matt, to wrap up and give closing remarks.
So there we go. I do have just a couple quick questions. They don't need to be long, just be respect of time. But how do you deal with the generational decline in volunteerism at your event, especially with like the younger crowd? Because some of the volunteers are becoming a bit older. What are you doing with your clubs for that, especially like with maybe leadership or small volunteer needs?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk to it on my front. I'm sure Cody and Kathy have some great input as well. But for us, like it's creating a culture of volunteerism and like showing whether it's having like the parents volunteer as part of like if they're around the kids, maybe they're helping out with certain different things. So they have those role models to look into. But it's also about like for us, we've had success in like kids that either just recently left their program because they graduated or they aged out, having them come back to volunteer, especially if you can identify kids that are like were role models because say they did really well or they are part of like they've developed in the process to like an elite cycling team, but they're still coming back to help out your program. Whether that's like literally pulling stakes and tape from race or helping lead clinics at one of our camps, like whatever that is, just showing them that like it's important to give back with a couple key role models can help kind of perpetually increase that volunteerism. I mean, I think it's a natural thing that's kind of tough to challenge if any of you are event promoters as well as just like club members, you know how hard it is to find volunteers for events. So in general, it's just like increasingly challenging, but that it's been successful for us. I can't say it's a perfect fix, but definitely helps.
Awesome. And do you at all approach high schools, local high schools, for presentations by chance, Brian?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
So are there any special considerations that you think about when approaching high schools?
Yeah. First of all, finding like the right contact to talk to, and whether that's through like, you can reach out to the athletic director or someone like that. It's not always the athletic director, or if you happen to know someone in their membership, or like they're a member of your club, or their parent is, or just somehow affiliated in the cycling world, that's a teacher or a staff member there. That's a huge help. Otherwise, I would say talking to athletic directors and or general advisors is seeing if they have any like health fairs going on or anything like that, or if you can even get into like their gym class as a presentation on cycling as a sport, as an option.
Awesome. All right, let's see here. And again, just respect of time here. Regarding clubs that have no race team and are not involved with those under 18 riding, what suggestions do you have for clubs like us? Let's see.
I'd say like, yeah, for Matt, for that individual that has that question, I'd say like, let me do some research on that within USA Cycling. And if you want to pass along that for us to connect or something like that outside of this call, provide some of those feedback.
Okay, great. And then also just it looks like Freddie and Eric, we will get in touch with you after this for your questions, especially with a blueprint to help younger organizations like yours. And then Eric, we will also get back with you about your question. So it looks like we are almost at time. So I would like to thank everybody who has joined, and especially our panelists. This recording will be available on our YouTube channel soon. Stay tuned for 2025 webinar topics as they come. But before you go, please take a moment to complete the survey. It definitely helps us with future webinar topics. So thank you again, everybody.
Awesome.
Thanks
Thank
for
you,
having me.
Brian.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Nice to meet you.